I woke up on a Tuesday morning to find construction equipment parked on the corner of my property, and I had no idea what the hell was going on. My name is Marcus Davis, and I had bought this corner lot in Meadowbrook Estates, just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, about 3 years ago. It was a beautiful piece of land with mature oak trees and plenty of space. I had worked hard to afford it, pulling double shifts at the hospital where I worked as a radiologic technologist. The corner location meant I had extra square footage, and I had plans to eventually build a gazebo near the property line where I could sit and enjoy my morning coffee. But that Tuesday morning in April, those plans seemed to be taking an unexpected turn. I walked outside in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, and approached a man in an orange safety vest who was operating a small excavator. "Excuse me," I called out over the noise of the machine. "What are you doing on my property?" The man looked confused and shut off the engine. "Your property?" "I was told this was HOA common area." "Well, you were told wrong," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is the corner of my lot. I have the survey stakes to prove it." The worker pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper from his pocket and examined it. "Says here we're installing a centralized mailbox station for the neighborhood. Are you sure about the property line?" "Completely sure," I replied. "I had it surveyed when I bought the place. Let me get the documents." I went back inside and retrieved my property survey from my file cabinet. When I returned, the worker was on his phone, presumably calling whoever had hired him. I showed him the survey and his face fell. "Yeah, you're right," he admitted. "This is definitely your property. I need to call the HOA president about this." That was my first direct encounter with Patricia Morrison, the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. She arrived 20 minutes later in a white Lexus SUV, wearing a tennis outfit and oversized sunglasses despite the overcast weather. Patricia was in her late 40s with blonde highlights and an expression that suggested she was used to getting her way. "There seems to be some confusion," she said, not bothering with introductions or pleasantries. "We approved the installation of this mailbox station months ago." "On my property," I pointed out, gesturing to the survey in my hand. "Without my permission." Patricia barely glanced at the document. "The plans were filed with the county and everything. This is the designated location for the new centralized mail delivery system. The post office requires it for the entire neighborhood." "Then you should have checked who actually owns this land before you filed those plans," I said. "Because it's mine, and I never gave anyone permission to build anything here." She pursed her lips. "Mr. Davis, you need to understand that this is for the benefit of the entire community. We're consolidating all the individual mailboxes into one secure location. It's more efficient and reduces mail theft." "That's fine, but you need to build it somewhere else. This is private property." Patricia pulled out her phone and started tapping aggressively. "Let me check something. When you purchased this property, you signed the HOA covenant agreements, correct?" "I did," I confirmed. "Well, those agreements give the HOA certain rights regarding community improvements. I'll need to review the exact language, but I believe we have the authority to use reasonable portions of corner lots for essential infrastructure." I felt my blood pressure rising. I read those documents very carefully before I signed them. "There's nothing in there about taking my land for mailboxes." "We'll see about that," she said dismissively. "In the meantime, I'm going to have to ask you to allow this work to proceed. We have a contract with this installation company and delays cost money." "No," I said firmly. "Not until you can prove you have the legal right to build on my property. Until then, these workers need to leave." Patricia's face reddened. "You're being extremely difficult about this. Do you realize how many people in this neighborhood are affected by mail delivery issues? This centralized station solves all of that. Then solve it on HOA property, not mine. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned to the construction worker. Pack up for now. We'll resolve this legal matter and be back. Then she looked back at me. You'll be hearing from our attorney, Mr. Davis. After they left, I spent the afternoon reviewing every page of my HOA documents. I had always been careful about contracts and legal agreements, which was why I had actually read the entire covenant before buying the house. There was absolutely nothing in there that gave the HOA the right to build permanent structures on private property without owner consent. They could enforce architectural standards, collect dues, and maintain common areas, but they could not simply take my land. That evening, I called my friend Derek, who was a real estate attorney in Charlotte. We had gone to college together, and I trusted his judgment. They can't do that, Derek confirmed after I explained the situation. HOA covenants can be pretty restrictive, but they can't override basic property rights. If they want to build on your land, they either need your permission or they need to have an easement explicitly stated in your deed. So, what should I do? Wait for their attorney to contact you, but don't agree to anything. If they try to proceed with construction, that's trespassing. You would have every right to remove whatever they build, even if they claim it's for the whole neighborhood. Even then, community benefit doesn't trump property ownership. They made a mistake in their planning, and that's their problem, not yours. I felt reassured by Derek's advice, but I also knew this was going to be a headache. HOAs could be relentless when they wanted something, and Patricia Morrison had already demonstrated that she was not the type to back down gracefully. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from an attorney named Richard Hutchins, representing the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. The letter was full of legal language, but the gist of it was that the HOA believed they had the authority to proceed with the mailbox station installation under Section 7.4 of the Covenant Agreement, which dealt with common facilities and infrastructure improvements. I read Section 7.4 again, this time with even more attention to detail. It stated that the HOA could establish, maintain, and improve common facilities for the benefit of all residents, including but not limited to recreational areas, landscaping, signage, and community amenities. There was absolutely nothing about building on private property, and the section specifically referred to common facilities, which implied HOA-owned land. I drafted a response letter with Derek's help, politely but firmly stating that Section 7.4 did not grant the HOA permission to build on my private property without my consent. I suggested they explore alternative locations on actual HOA common areas, of which there were several throughout the neighborhood. 2 weeks passed without a response. I thought maybe they had accepted reality and were making new plans. I was wrong. On a Saturday morning in early May, I left my house to run errands. When I returned 3 hours later, I found that the mailbox station had been installed on my property. It was a large structure, probably 15 feet long and 4 feet wide, made of brick and metal with individual lockable mailbox units for what looked like 40 or 50 households. It sat right on the corner of my lot, exactly where the construction crew had been planning to put it that first day. I was furious. I immediately called Derek. "They installed it while you were gone?" he asked, sounding as incredulous as I felt. "Yes, the whole damn thing. It's sitting on my property right now." "That's trespassing and property damage. You have several options here, Marcus. You can call the police and file a report, you can sue for removal and damages, or you can remove it yourself." "Can I really remove it myself? Legally?" "Yes. It's an unpermitted structure on your private property. You would be within your rights to remove it. However, if you do, I'd recommend documenting everything thoroughly. Take photos and videos before and after, and be prepared for the HOA to lose their minds. They should have thought about that before they built on my land without permission. I spent the rest of that afternoon documenting everything. I took photos from every angle, recorded video, and even wrote down the exact measurements of where the structure sat relative to my survey stakes. Then, I called a contractor I knew named Mike who did demolition work. "Can you come out tomorrow morning?" I asked. "I need something removed from my property." Mike was there at 8 on Sunday morning with a truck and equipment. The mailbox station was sturdy, but it was not designed to withstand a determined removal effort. The whole thing was bolted to a concrete foundation that had been poured into the ground, but Mike had the tools to unbolt the structure and break up the concrete. "This is a pretty nice mailbox setup," Mike commented as he worked. "Shame somebody built it in the wrong place." "That's one way to put it," I said. By noon, the entire structure was gone. Mike loaded the pieces into his truck and hauled them away to a storage facility where I had rented a unit specifically for this purpose. I wanted to preserve everything in case there were legal proceedings. The concrete foundation was broken up and removed, and I had sod laid over the area to restore it to how it had looked before. I was sitting on my porch admiring the work when Patricia Morrison came screeching into my driveway. She jumped out of her car, her face purple with rage. "What have you done?" she screamed. "That mailbox station cost the HOA $15,000. Then you wasted $15,000 building it on property you don't own," I replied calmly. "You cannot just destroy community property. That's vandalism." "It was on my property without my permission. That makes it trespassing, not community property. The entire neighborhood needs those mailboxes. Mail delivery is being suspended because we don't have a centralized location." That caught my attention. "What do you mean suspended?" Patricia looked slightly triumphant despite her anger. "The post office gave us a deadline to install the centralized mailbox station because our neighborhood has grown too large for individual mailbox delivery. If we don't have the station, they won't deliver mail to any of the houses in Meadowbrook Estates. You just caused everyone in this neighborhood to lose their mail service." I had not known about the post office deadline, but it did not change the fundamental issue. "Then you need to install it on HOA property, Patricia. I told you that from the beginning. There is no other suitable location. This corner was chosen specifically because it's accessible to the mail carrier's route and visible from the main road. Every other common area is either too small or in the wrong location. That sounds like a planning problem, and it's not my responsibility to solve it for you." "You're being incredibly selfish," Patricia yelled. "Do you understand that you're affecting dozens of families? People need their mail. Medications, bills, important documents. And I understand that. But you built on my property without permission after I explicitly told you not to. You could have come to me and asked for an easement. You could have offered compensation. Instead, you decided to ignore my property rights and build anyway. We don't have time for negotiations. The post office deadline was yesterday. Then you should have planned better and started this process months ago when you had time." Patricia pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over, Mr. Davis. You're going to regret this. The HOA has resources, and we have every right to enforce community standards. You'll be facing fines, legal action, and complete ostracism from your neighbors. I'll make sure everyone knows you're the reason they can't get their mail." She stormed off, and I sat there feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. I was confident I was in the right legally, but Patricia's threat about the neighbors worried me. I did not want to become a pariah in my own neighborhood, but I also could not allow the HOA to simply take my property because it was convenient for them. By Monday morning, my concerns about neighbor relations proved justified. I found a nasty note taped to my front door calling me selfish and inconsiderate. Later that day, a woman I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood stopped her car in front of my house and rolled down her window. "I hope you're happy," she said angrily. "My mother's medication was supposed to arrive today, and now we have to drive 40 minutes to the post office to pick it up. Thanks a lot." I tried to explain that I had not caused the problem, that the HOA had built on my property without permission, but she drove off before I could finish. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. Someone egged my car. My mailbox, the individual one I still had at the street, was knocked over. I received dozens of angry emails from neighbors I had never even spoken to before. The HOA had clearly launched a campaign to paint me as the villain in this situation. On Wednesday, I received a notice from the HOA stating that I was being fined $500 per day for interfering with essential community infrastructure. I immediately forwarded it to Derek. "They can't do that," Derek said when I called him. "They're just trying to intimidate you. Don't pay the fine. We'll fight it if they try to put a lien on your property." "This is getting out of hand, Derek. People in the neighborhood hate me now. Have you considered talking to the local news?" This is exactly the kind of HOA overreach story they love. It might apply some public pressure. I thought about it. I was a private person and did not relish the idea of being on television, but I was also tired of being portrayed as the bad guy when I was simply defending my property rights. That evening, I contacted a local news station and explained the situation. A reporter named Jennifer Chen called me back within an hour and seemed very interested in the story. We scheduled an interview for Friday afternoon. Before the interview, though, things took another turn. On Thursday morning, I received a call from the Meadowbrook Estates Architectural Review Committee, informing me that my house was in violation of several HOA standards. According to their letter, my grass was half an inch too tall, my exterior paint had faded beyond acceptable limits, and I had an unauthorized decorative rock in my front garden. The violations were absurd. My lawn was perfectly maintained. My house had been painted just 2 years ago and looked fine. And the unauthorized decorative rock was a natural stone I had found on my own property and placed near a tree because I thought it looked nice. It was obvious retaliation, and I documented everything with photos and measurements. I also noticed that half the houses in the neighborhood had lawns taller than mine and several had more faded paint, but apparently, only I was being cited for violations. Jennifer Chen arrived on Friday with a cameraman, and we did the interview in my front yard. I explained the entire situation calmly and factually, showing her the property survey, the HOA correspondence, and photos of where the mailbox station had been built on my land. "The HOA built this structure on your property without your permission?" Jennifer asked, her expression incredulous. "Correct. After I explicitly told them not to. And now they're fining you for removing it, $500 per day, yes. They're also citing me for bogus violations as retaliation. What does the HOA say about this? You would have to ask them. I've tried to resolve this reasonably, but they refuse to acknowledge that they made a mistake." Jennifer interviewed Patricia Morrison later that day. I watched the news segment that evening, and Patricia's performance was telling. She insisted that the HOA had acted within its rights, and that my removal of the mailbox station had caused irreparable harm to the community. When Jennifer pointed out that the structure had been built on private property without permission, Patricia became defensive and claimed that property lines are often unclear in these situations. But Mr. Davis has a certified survey showing the mailbox station was on his land, Jennifer pressed. We're reviewing all the documentation with our attorneys, Patricia replied stiffly. What matters now is that an entire neighborhood is suffering because of one person's refusal to cooperate with reasonable community improvements. The news segment was more balanced than I had hoped. Jennifer presented both sides but made it clear that I had the survey to prove my case, while the HOA only had vague assertions about their authority. The segment ended with Jennifer noting that disputes like this were becoming increasingly common as HOAs wielded more power in American neighborhoods. The response to the news story was immediate and divided. On social media, some people defended me and criticized HOA overreach. Others sided with Patricia and argued that I should have been more cooperative for the good of the community. But the story also caught the attention of people outside Meadowbrook Estates who had their own HOA horror stories to share. On Saturday, I received a surprising phone call from a man named Thomas Brennan, who lived on the other side of Meadowbrook Estates. "Mr. Davis, I saw you on the news," he said. "I want you to know that not everyone in the neighborhood blames you for this. A lot of us are fed up with Patricia Morrison and the way she runs the HOA." "I appreciate that," I said, feeling some relief. "There's actually a group of us who have been talking about trying to vote her out at the next board election. Would you be interested in joining us?" "When is the election?" "Not until November, but we need to start organizing now if we want to have any chance." Patricia has been president for 6 years, and she's made a lot of enemies. This mailbox situation might be the thing that finally turns enough people against her. I agreed to meet with Thomas and his group. We gathered the following Tuesday evening at Thomas's house, and I was surprised to find about 15 other residents there. Some I recognized, others I had never met. Thomas introduced everyone and then laid out the situation. Patricia runs the HOA like it's her personal fiefdom. She makes decisions without consulting the board, she plays favorites with who gets cited for violations, and she spends HOA funds without proper oversight. This mailbox disaster is just the latest example. A woman named Carol spoke up. "My husband and I tried to add a deck to our house last year. We submitted plans, followed all the HOA rules, and waited for approval. Patricia rejected it because she said the wood stain color was not on the approved list, but the color was literally on the list. She just did not like it because she thought it would be visible from the street." Others shared similar stories of arbitrary decisions, selective enforcement, and petty tyranny. It became clear that Patricia had accumulated a lot of resentment over the years, but people had felt powerless to challenge her because she had a core group of supporters who always voted in the HOA elections. "The key is turnout," Thomas explained. "Only about 30% of homeowners usually vote in HOA elections. Patricia wins because her supporters are organized and motivated. If we can get more people to vote, we can win." We formed a plan to start reaching out to neighbors, building a coalition, and finding candidates to run for the board positions that would be up for election. I volunteered to run for one of the seats, despite my earlier reluctance to get involved in HOA politics. This situation had made it personal. Meanwhile, the mailbox problem was still unresolved, and residents were growing increasingly frustrated with having to drive to the post office to collect their mail. The HOA sent out several emails blaming me for the inconvenience, but some residents were starting to ask questions about why the structure had been built on private property in the first place. In late May, I received another certified letter, this time from a different attorney. The HOA was suing me for $15,000 in damages for the removal of the mailbox station, plus the daily fines that had accumulated to over $10,000, plus attorney fees. They were also seeking an injunction to force me to allow reconstruction of the mailbox station on my property. Derek filed a response denying all claims and filing a counter-suit for trespassing, property damage, and harassment. We also requested that the court issue a restraining order preventing the HOA from any further construction on my property. The legal process moved slowly, as it always does. We had a preliminary hearing in July where the judge heard arguments from both sides. Patricia's attorney, Richard Hutchins, argued that the HOA had acted in good faith based on the community covenants, and that removing the mailbox station had caused substantial harm to the neighborhood. Derek countered by presenting the property survey and pointing out that nothing in the HOA covenants gave them the right to build on private property without consent. He also presented evidence of the retaliatory fines and violations the HOA had levied against me. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Sandra Wallace, listened carefully to both arguments. At the end of the hearing, she issued a preliminary ruling. Based on what I've heard today, it appears that the homeowners association did indeed build a structure on Mr. Davis's private property without obtaining his permission or establishing a legal easement. Regardless of the community benefit such a structure might provide, property rights cannot be ignored. I am denying the HOA's request for an injunction, and I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from any further construction on Mr. Davis's property without his explicit written consent. As for the damages and fines, we'll address those issues at the full trial. Court is adjourned. It was a significant victory, but I knew the fight was not over. Patricia left the courthouse looking furious, and Richard Hutchins immediately filed notice that they would be appealing the decision. Back in the neighborhood, the mailbox situation was creating more chaos. The post office had set up a temporary holding facility at their main office, but it was inconvenient for everyone. Some residents had started demanding that Patricia find a solution, any solution. In August, I heard through Thomas that the HOA board had finally started looking at alternative locations for the mailbox station. There was a small common area near the neighborhood entrance that could potentially work if they reconfigured the landscaping. It would cost more money and require additional permits, but it was on HOA-owned land. However, Patricia was still resisting this option, apparently because she did not want to admit that her original plan had been wrong. She continued to insist that my corner lot was the only viable location and that I was being unreasonable. The breaking point came in September. A resident named Ellen Hayes, who was elderly and relied heavily on mail delivery for her medications and bills, had a medical emergency because she did not receive an important notice from her doctor about a prescription change. She ended up in the hospital, and her son was furious. Ellen's son, Robert, attended the next HOA meeting and gave an impassioned speech about the board's incompetence and Patricia's stubbornness. He pointed out that the mailbox problem could have been resolved months ago if they had simply chosen a different location, instead of insisting on using property they did not own. My mother is in the hospital because this HOA is more interested in winning a fight than serving the community, Robert said, his voice shaking with anger. Patricia Morrison needs to resign, and the rest of this board needs to take responsibility for this disaster. Several other residents applauded, and for the first time, Patricia seemed rattled. The meeting grew contentious, with people shouting questions and accusations. Finally, One of the other board members, a man named Stephen Cooper, stood up. "I've had enough of this," Stephen said. "Patricia, you told us that building on that corner lot was legal and approved. You said you had verified the property lines. Obviously, that was not true. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in your leadership." Patricia tried to shut down the discussion, but the other board members overruled her. A vote was taken, and Patricia lost 3-2. She was removed as president, and Stephen was elected as interim president until the November elections. It was a dramatic turn of events, and it changed everything. Stephen reached out to me the next day. "Mr. Davis, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA for everything that has happened," he said. "Patricia should never have built on your property, and the way you've been treated is unacceptable. We're dropping the lawsuit and all the fines. We're also going to move forward with the alternative location for the mailbox station." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely relieved. I never wanted to be at war with the HOA. I just wanted my property rights respected. "Understood. We'll also be issuing a statement to the neighborhood clarifying what actually happened and taking responsibility for the error. You shouldn't have to deal with angry neighbors because of our mistakes." True to his word, Stephen sent out an email to all residents explaining the situation honestly. He acknowledged that the HOA had built on my private property without permission, that I had been within my rights to remove the structure, and that the delays in resolving the mailbox situation were due to poor planning and leadership, not my actions. The neighborhood attitude toward me shifted considerably after that. People who had been hostile became apologetic. I even received a few gift baskets and apology notes. It was a strange feeling to go from pariah to somewhat of a neighborhood hero in the span of a few weeks. The new mailbox station was completed in October at the alternative location near the neighborhood entrance. It cost the HOA an additional $8,000 because of the landscaping and permit changes, but it worked fine and was actually more convenient for most residents than the corner location would have been. The November HOA elections brought more changes. Thomas ran for president and won easily. I was elected to one of the board positions, along with 2 other reformers from our group. Patricia Morrison did not run for re-election, and I heard through the grapevine that she and her husband were planning to sell their house and move to a different neighborhood. In December, the HOA officially dropped their lawsuit against me, and my countersuit was settled with the HOA agreeing to pay my attorney fees and issue a formal apology. Derek had done an excellent job representing me throughout the entire ordeal. At our first official board meeting in January, we reviewed the HOA's finances and procedures. What we found was alarming. Patricia had been signing contracts and spending HOA funds without proper board approval for years. The mailbox station was just one example. She had also approved expensive landscaping projects, hired her brother-in-law's company for maintenance work at inflated prices, and had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses like lunches and gas. The total amount of misappropriated funds appeared to be somewhere around $40,000 over a 6-year period. Thomas immediately contacted an attorney to review our options. "This could be criminal," the attorney, a woman named Lisa Thornton, explained. "If Patricia was intentionally misusing HOA funds for personal benefit, that's embezzlement. You need to file a police report." We did exactly that. In February, Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department opened an investigation into Patricia Morrison's handling of HOA funds. Detectives interviewed board members, reviewed financial records, and eventually executed a search warrant at Patricia's home. The investigation revealed that Patricia had been systematically defrauding the HOA for years. She had created fake invoices for work that was never performed, had written checks to herself disguised as contractor payments, and had used the HOA credit card for personal purchases. The total amount of theft was estimated at nearly $60,000. In March, Patricia Morrison was arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. The story made the local news again, and Jennifer Chen did a follow-up report connecting it to the Mailbox station controversy from the previous year. What started as a property dispute over a mailbox station has uncovered years of financial misconduct by the former HOA president, Jennifer reported. Marcus Davis, the homeowner who fought back against the illegal construction, says he never expected the situation to escalate this far. They showed a clip of me from a brief interview. "I just wanted to protect my property rights," I said. "I had no idea about the financial issues until we started reviewing the records after the election, but I'm glad the truth came out. HOAs are supposed to serve homeowners, not exploit them." Patricia's criminal case proceeded through the courts over the following months. Her attorney tried to argue that the financial irregularities were accounting errors, not intentional theft, but the evidence was overwhelming. In June, she pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for agreeing to pay full restitution to the HOA and serve 2 years of probation. The restitution was a problem because Patricia and her husband had already spent most of the stolen money. They ended up having to sell their house to pay back the HOA, and they moved out of state shortly after the legal proceedings concluded. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates improved considerably under the new HOA leadership. Thomas ran the organization transparently, with regular communication and proper oversight. We reduced unnecessary spending, eliminated the petty and arbitrary rule enforcement, and focused on actual community improvements like repairing playground equipment and organizing neighborhood events. The mailbox station worked perfectly at its proper location, and mail delivery resumed without any further issues. The corner of my lot where the original station had been built was restored completely, and I eventually did build that gazebo I had originally planned. It was a nice spot to sit and reflect on everything that had happened. One evening in early August, Thomas stopped by while I was sitting in the gazebo. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the other chair. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset. "You know," Thomas said, "none of this would have changed if you had not stood up to Patricia. Most people just give in when the HOA pushes them around because it seems easier than fighting." "I almost did give in," I admitted. "There were times when I wondered if it was worth all the stress and conflict. But it was the principle of the thing. If I let them take my property without consent, what would they try next?" "Exactly. And it turns out your instincts were right." Patricia was corrupt, and she was getting away with it because nobody questioned her authority. How are the finances looking now that everything is cleaned up? Much better. We actually have a healthy reserve fund now that we are not bleeding money through Patricia's schemes. We are even planning to reduce the HOA dues next year. That will make people happy, Thomas chuckled. Some people are never happy with HOAs no matter what, but at least we are trying to do it right. We talked for a while longer about neighborhood matters and future plans. It felt good to be part of an organization that was actually functional and accountable. The whole experience had taught me a lot about the importance of standing up for your rights and not backing down in the face of intimidation. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. Ellen Hayes, the elderly woman who had been hospitalized during the mailbox controversy, came to my door with a plate of homemade cookies. Mr. Davis, she said warmly, I wanted to thank you properly for everything you did. Mrs. Hayes, you do not need to thank me. I am just sorry you went through that medical emergency. That was not your fault, dear. That was Patricia's fault for being stubborn and dishonest. But if you had not fought back, we never would have discovered what she was doing with our money. You saved this neighborhood. I invited her in, and we had coffee and cookies while she told me stories about the neighborhood's history. She had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for over 20 years and had seen the HOA go through several leadership changes. Patricia was not always so bad, Ellen explained. When she first became president, she was actually quite reasonable, but power went to her head over the years. She started treating homeowners like subjects instead of neighbors. It is a common problem with HOAs, I think, I said. People get a little bit of authority and forget they are supposed to be serving the community. Well, you and Thomas are doing a wonderful job now. The neighborhood feels different. People are friendlier. There is less tension. After Ellen left, I thought about how much had changed in just over a year. What had started as a simple property dispute had turned into a complete transformation of the neighborhood's governance. It was not what I had expected when I bought my corner lot, but I was glad I had not backed down. The following months were relatively peaceful. The HOA ran smoothly, neighborhood relations were positive, and I was able to enjoy my property without constant conflict. The gazebo became a favorite spot not just for me, but for neighbors who would occasionally stop by to chat while I was sitting outside. In October, we held the one-year anniversary of the new HOA board's election. Thomas organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate, and the turnout was impressive. People brought food, kids played in the common areas, and there was a genuine sense of community that had been missing during Patricia's reign. During the barbecue, several neighbors approached me to share their own stories about conflicts with the previous HOA leadership. It seemed like almost everyone had some grievance or another, but they had felt powerless to do anything about it. You inspired us, one man said. Seeing you stand up to them made me realize we did not have to just accept whatever the board decided. I appreciated the sentiment, though I still felt a bit awkward being treated like some kind of hero. I had just been protecting my property. The real work of reform had been done by Thomas and the other board members who had implemented actual policy changes. As fall turned to winter, I reflected on the lessons I had learned from the entire experience. Property rights matter, and they are worth defending even when it is difficult or unpopular. HOAs can serve useful purposes, but they need oversight and accountability to prevent abuse. And communities are stronger when people are willing to stand up against corruption and overreach, even when it would be easier to just go along. In December, I received a letter from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. They had been conducting their own investigation into the HOA management practices in response to Patricia's criminal case. The letter thanked me for my cooperation with their inquiry and informed me that they were implementing new regulations for HOA governance in the state to prevent similar abuses in the future. It felt good to know that something positive had come from all the conflict and stress. If the new regulations helped even one homeowner avoid what I had gone through, it would be worth it. On Christmas Eve, I was sitting in my gazebo with a warm blanket and a cup of hot chocolate, looking at the lights people had put up around the neighborhood. It was peaceful and beautiful, exactly the kind of environment I had imagined when I first bought the house. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek, my attorney friend. "Merry Christmas, Marcus. Glad you fought the good fight. You made a real difference." I smiled and texted back my thanks. Derek had been instrumental in helping me navigate the legal complexities of the situation. Without his guidance, I might have made mistakes that could have cost me dearly. As I sat there in the cold evening air, I thought about how close I had come to just accepting the HOA's actions. It would have been easier in the short term to just let them build the mailbox station on my property. I would have avoided all the conflict, the harassment, the legal battles. But I also would have surrendered something fundamental, my right to control what happened on my own land. The experience had also taught me that institutions, even small ones like HOAs, can become corrupt when people stop paying attention. Patricia had gotten away with her schemes for years because homeowners had not been engaged or informed. It was only when someone challenged her authority that the whole house of cards collapsed. In January, the HOA held its annual meeting to review the previous year and plan for the future. The attendance was much higher than in previous years, with nearly 200 residents showing up. Thomas gave a presentation on the financial recovery, the policy changes that had been implemented, and the goals for the coming year. When it came time for the community comment period, a young woman I did not recognize stood up. "I just wanted to say thank you to the board and to Mr. Davis specifically," she said. "My husband and I moved into Meadowbrook Estates in November, right after all the drama with the old board had concluded. We had been warned about HOA problems by friends who live in other neighborhoods, but everyone we talked to said this was one of the good ones now. That is because of the work you all did to clean things up. So thank you." There was applause, and several other people spoke up to echo the sentiment. It was gratifying to hear, even though I still felt like I had just done what anyone should do in defending their property. After the meeting, a reporter from a national real estate magazine approached me. She was working on a story about HOA disputes and wanted to interview me about my experience. "Your case has become pretty well known in real estate circles," she explained. "It is being used as an example in law schools and HOA management courses. People want to understand how situations like this can be prevented." I agreed to the interview, which took place a few weeks later. The resulting article was published in March and focused on the broader issues of HOA governance and property rights. My story was featured prominently, but the article also included examples from other homeowners across the country who had faced similar problems. The attention was a bit overwhelming at times. I received emails from people all over the country asking for advice about their own HOA disputes. I tried to respond when I could, usually by recommending they consult with a real estate attorney and document everything carefully. By spring, life had fully returned to normal. The mailbox station controversy felt like ancient history, and the neighborhood was thriving under competent leadership. I had settled into my role on the HOA board, focusing primarily on architectural review and ensuring that rules were applied fairly and consistently. In April, exactly 2 years after the construction crew had first appeared on my property, I hosted a small dinner party with Thomas, Derek, and a few other friends who had supported me during the controversy. We ate, drank, and reminisced about the craziness of the previous 2 years. "You know what the best part is," Thomas said. "Patricia probably thought she was just dealing with another pushover homeowner who would not fight back. She had no idea she was messing with someone who would actually stand his ground." "I almost did not," I admitted. "There were times when I seriously considered just letting it go. But you did not," Derek pointed out, "and that made all the difference." As the evening wound down and my guests left, I walked out to the gazebo one more time. The corner of my property, where all the trouble had started, was now just a peaceful spot with grass and trees. You would never know that a mailbox station had once sat there, or that its placement had sparked a year-long battle that ultimately brought down a corrupt HOA president. I thought about everything that had happened and everything I had learned. Standing up for yourself is not always easy, and it is not always popular, but it is necessary. Property rights are not just abstract legal concepts, they are fundamental to freedom and autonomy. When organizations, whether they are governments or HOAs or any other institution, try to override those rights for convenience or profit, someone has to push back. I had been that someone, not because I was particularly brave or principled, but because I had reached a point where I could not accept being pushed around. And in pushing back, I had not only protected my own property, but had also helped expose corruption that was harming an entire neighborhood. The legal system had worked eventually. The courts had recognized my property rights. The criminal justice system had held Patricia accountable for her theft. The democratic process within the HOA had allowed for leadership change. None of it had been quick or easy, but it had worked. As I sat there in the gazebo, feeling the warm spring breeze, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because I had won, but because I had done the right thing even when it was difficult. That was something nobody could take away from me. Not Patricia Morrison, not an angry mob of neighbors, not anyone. The experience had changed me in subtle ways. I was more confident in standing up for myself. I was more engaged in community affairs. I was more aware of the importance of good governance and accountability. These were not lessons I had sought out, but they were valuable nonetheless. In the months that followed, Meadowbrook Estates continued to improve. The HOA implemented new transparency measures, including publishing detailed financial reports and holding regular town halls where residents could ask questions and raise concerns. The petty rule enforcement that had characterized Patricia's reign was replaced with reasonable, consistent application of sensible standards. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased, partly because of the improved HOA management, and partly because the story of the reform had gotten enough attention that Meadowbrook Estates became known as a well-run community. It was ironic that Patricia's corruption and my fight against the mailbox station had ultimately benefited everyone's home values. In June, I received one final piece of correspondence related to the whole affair. It was a letter from Richard Hutchins, the attorney who had represented the HOA in their lawsuit against me. It was brief and professional, but it essentially acknowledged that he had been wrong to pursue the case and that he should have advised his client differently. "I have been practicing law for 25 years, he wrote, and the Morrison case was a reminder that even experienced attorneys can be led astray by clients who are not truthful about the facts. I should have insisted on seeing the property survey before filing suit. I apologize for the trouble my actions caused you. It was an unexpected gesture, and I appreciated it." I wrote back a brief note thanking him for the apology and wishing him well. There was no point in holding grudges. The matter was resolved, justice had been served, and everyone could move forward. As summer arrived and the neighborhood hosted pool parties and 4th of July barbecues, I found myself feeling genuinely happy with where I lived. The sense of community was strong, the HOA was functional and fair, and my property was exactly what I had hoped it would be when I bought it 3 years earlier. The corner lot was still my favorite feature. The extra space gave me room to garden, to build projects, and to have that gazebo where I spent so many peaceful evenings. It was worth fighting for, and I was glad I had not given in to pressure to surrender it. One evening in late July, I was sitting in the gazebo reading a book when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, and I recognized them as the people who had recently bought Patricia Morrison's old house. They walked over, somewhat tentatively. "Mr. Davis," the man said. "I am Jason, and this is my wife Amanda. We just moved into the neighborhood." "Welcome," I said, standing up to shake their hands. "How are you settling in?" "Really well," Amanda said. "Everyone has been so friendly. We heard about everything that happened with the previous owner and the HOA issues. We just wanted to say thank you for standing up to that. It is part of why we felt comfortable buying here, knowing the HOA is well run now." We chatted for a while, and I gave them some recommendations for local restaurants and services. It felt good to welcome new neighbors without any of the drama and conflict that had marked my own early years in Meadowbrook Estates. As I watched them walk back to their house, I realized that the story had come full circle. The mailbox station was in its proper place. The HOA was functioning as it should. Patricia had been held accountable, and life in the neighborhood was peaceful. It had taken a long fight to get here, but it was worth it. The sun was setting, casting orange and pink light across the sky. I sat back down in my gazebo and picked up my book, but I found myself just looking around at the neighborhood instead. This was home, and it felt right. The corner lot that had caused so much trouble was now just a peaceful piece of property, exactly as it should be. I thought about the question people had asked me repeatedly throughout the ordeal. Was it worth all the trouble just for a mailbox station? The question missed the point entirely. It was never about the mailbox. It was about the principle that private property means something, that individuals have rights that cannot be trampled by organizations claiming to act for the greater good, and that standing up against abuse and corruption is always worth the effort. Those principles mattered then, and they would matter in whatever challenges I faced in the future. The mailbox station controversy had taught me that lesson in a very personal and concrete way. I would not forget it. As darkness fell and the stars came out, I finally went inside, turning off the lights in my gazebo and locking up for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight I was content. My property was my own, my neighborhood was thriving, and justice had been served. That was enough.